My neighbor in 8B vanished, and now the mirror won't show me Reddit horror story. They always said something was strange about apartment 8B, but nobody could ever tell exactly what. Not in a haunted house way or anything that would make the tabloids, but in that barely perceptible tension you feel when you pass a room that holds too many unspoken things. I lived in 8A. Just a paper, thin wall and 6 digits in difference. That wall had heard everything. Screams. Laughter. Silence so heavy it pressed against your chest like a weight. But it all began long before I started eavesdropping. Long before I noticed the first crack in her voice. Long before I realized I'd been living next to a theater, and I wasn't the audience. I was part of the script. I moved in on a Thursday. I remember because the building manager, a short man with a limp and a perfect memory for rent checks, handed me my keys and said, "Don't knock on 8B. If she wants to talk to you, she will." I thought it was odd. Not unfriendly, just careful, like someone warning you not to tap on the glass at a zoo. So I didn't knock, not that day. Not for weeks. But I heard her before I ever saw her. Her heels clicking across the tile, always evenly spaced like a metronome. Her phone calls, muffled but animated, like she was always explaining herself to someone who wasn't listening. Her music, often jazz, sometimes classical, but never pop, as if emotions had to be filtered through centuries before she could stand to feel them. It was the kind of building where anonymity was currency. You could pass the same person in the hall 20 times and never learn their name. People came and went, some moved, some vanished. Some stayed but seemed to rot in place, eyes sinking deeper into skulls as the city chewed on their ambitions. But her, she was different, not in the way movies romanticize. She wasn't draped in mystery. She was mystery, yes, but not the seductive kind. The unnerving kind. The kind that doesn't flirt but stares too long, then looks away like she's seen something and you haven't yet found. Her name was Lena. I didn't find out through introduction, but through the way the building mailboxes had been labeled and relabeled over the years. Hers had a sticker that had been half torn away, exposing another name underneath. Not crossed out, just partially hidden, like someone couldn't quite bring themselves to erase the past. That sticker said, Lena R. No last name. Just an initial. It seemed intentional. Even her identity had a boundary. For the first 3 months, we didn't speak. I'd see her in the elevator, sometimes clutching a tote bag like it carried more than groceries. She wore scarves in the summer. Not for fashion, I think, but armor. Like she needed something around her neck to keep the world at a distance. She never smiled, but she didn't frown either. Her face lived in a kind of equilibrium. Expressionless, but never empty. You got the sense that if she blinked, an entire novel could happen behind her eyelids. Then came the night I heard the thud. Not a crash. Not a fall. A thud, like something. Or someone had dropped not violently, but with finality. I had just returned from work, exhausted, half drunk on cheap wine and office air conditioning, and I was peeling off my jacket when the sound echoed through the wall. I paused, hand mid-air. Then silence. A stillness that felt too deliberate. I pressed my ear to the wall. Nothing. The jazz that usually played around this hour was absent. No movement, no click of heels, just still air and plaster. I told myself not to get involved. I wasn't the nosy neighbor type, but the silence kept growing hour by hour, like a black hole behind drywall. The next morning, there was still nothing. That was the first time I knocked. Not once, but twice. Firm, not aggressive, just enough to say I noticed. She didn't answer. I leaned closer. Lena called, feeling ridiculous for using her name like we were friends. You okay? A pause. Then the deadbolt slid open, slowly, like a breath being exhaled. The door cracked just a sliver, and her eye appeared in the gap. Wide alert, but not afraid. Fine, she said. Just that. Nothing more. Then, the door shut, and the bolt returned to its resting place. But something had shifted. She knew I was watching. And now, I knew she knew. Over the next few weeks, things changed. Small things. Her door, once always closed, was sometimes left ajar. Her mail began piling up, not just junk, but handwritten envelopes with no return address. Her music changed, too. No more jazz. Just static sometimes. Once I heard what I think was a recording of rain, looping over and over again like a memory someone couldn't forget. She stopped going out at regular hours. I started seeing food delivery bags outside her door. Never opened in front of the courier, always snatched like contraband once they walked away. She was retreating into the apartment like it was a cave, and the world outside was too bright, too sharp. I began to dream about her. Not in a romantic way. In the way you dream about puzzles. Things that don't make sense, that wake you up at night with questions you didn't know you were asking. Sometimes I dreamed I was in her apartment, only everything was backward. Left was right, windows were on the floor, and clocks ran in reverse. I'd wake up disoriented, walk to my own bathroom, and find myself staring at my reflection as if I expected her to be behind me. Then, one morning, I heard crying. Quiet at first, then louder, rising like a kettle about to scream. Not the theatrical kind. The kind you try to swallow, but it burns all the way down. It shook me. I sat on my bed, unable to move. I wanted to knock. I wanted to help. But something inside told me this is a performance you're not meant to interrupt. This isn't a show. It's a confession. A week later, she left a note. Not to me. Slipped under my door, yes, but unsigned. It read, "Do you ever wonder what parts of yourself you had to bury just to be loved?" I stared at the paper for an hour. Was it meant for me? For someone else? Had she mistaken my door for another? Or did she know I'd been listening, observing, stitching together her silence like a detective with no case? I tried to return it. Slipped it under her door the next day with nothing added, hoping the gesture would say, "I don't know the answer either." But the note came back the following night, now bearing 7 new words scribbled in the corner. "If you dig too deep, it breaks you." That was the first time I felt afraid. It wasn't the content, it was the intimacy of it. The way it felt less like a warning and more like a prophecy. Like someone telling you the end of the movie before the first act has even begun. After that, I stopped knocking. But I started writing. Everything I remembered. Everything I heard. Everything that didn't make sense. I didn't know why. Just that something was coming, and I didn't want to be the only one who didn't see it coming. And I would. It's right. Because on the last Sunday of August, she vanished. Just like that. No moving truck, no goodbye, no notice on the mailbox. The door remained closed, but the light under it never returned. I waited 2 days, then 5, then 10. I finally asked the building manager casually, like I wasn't already keeping a journal about it. He blinked slowly as if calculating whether I deserved the answer. Then said, 8B. Rented, but hasn't been paid for in 2 months. No one's seen her since July. I opened my mouth to respond but found no words. Because I knew she'd been there in August. I'd heard the rain sounds on August 11. I'd seen a food bag on August 14. I had the note from August 17. But maybe that's when it began. Because 3 days after I learned she'd been gone longer than I believed, her door opened on its own. And someone else walked out. But it wasn't Lena. And they didn't have a shadow. They didn't have a shadow. I saw it with my own eyes, I swear. The hallway was dimly lit. As usual, one flickering bulb above the stairwell, and yet as the figure stepped out of 8B, there was nothing trailing behind them. No stretch of gray against the floor, no outline interrupted by light. Just a shape impossibly still, as though it had been drawn onto the scene with a pencil that refused to smudge. I stood frozen behind the peephole, breath barely ticking against the glass, heart threatening to puncture my chest. They didn't look back, didn't lock the door. Just turned left down the corridor and vanished like a smudge on a wet canvas. I opened my door not 5 seconds later, barefoot, adrenaline dragging me forward like a leash, and yet the hallway was empty. Not a single sound, not a footprint, not even the scent of someone having passed. And the door to 8B, left slightly open, hanging there like a question waiting to be answered. I should have walked away, called someone, the manager, the police, anyone, but instead I stepped inside. Curiosity has teeth, and mine were already sunk too deep. The air was stale, but not with rot. With memory. The kind of weight that clings to curtains and walls and the underside of furniture. Her apartment was both exactly as I imagined and nothing like I expected. Sparse. Tasteful. A couch with a pale throw draped with surgical precision. A bookshelf lined with hardcovers, each title in alphabetical order, except one missing between H and J, a record player with dust so evenly spread across its surface I knew it hadn't played since before summer. And then, the oddities. A glass bowl full of old keys, none of them matching the doors in the building. A corkboard on the wall pinned with faded photographs of people I didn't recognize, their faces partially burned or scratched out. A mirror near the kitchen turned around to face the wall. A phone with no cord. A calendar stuck on May, as though time had stopped and nobody told her body to leave. But most disturbing, her journal. Or what I assumed was one. A thick black notebook sitting dead center on the dining table, with a single pen laid atop it like a ritual. I hesitated. My hand hovered. I knew I shouldn't read it. But if someone leaves behind a ghost, don't you owe it to them to listen before they vanish completely? The first page was blank. So was the second. But the third, lines scrawled in an angular, almost frantic script. If you hear the static, it's already inside you. If you see the hallway twice in one night, don't speak. Don't blink. And whatever you do, don't follow your own reflection. I blinked, then read it again. It made no sense. But neither did a woman disappearing without a trace. Neither did a stranger walking out of her apartment with no shadow. I turned the page. More sentences disconnected, chaotic, the mirrors record everything. That's why I covered mine. Don't let them face you when you sleep. Another, there was never anyone named Lena. That was just a name I borrowed. My real name burned with the others. I slammed the journal shut and backed away. My skin was humming. Not metaphorically. I felt it, a low vibration under my arms, along the back of my neck, as if the air had changed frequency and my bones hadn't adapted. I left the apartment without closing the door. I told myself I'd go back, that I needed time to think, to breathe. But deep down I knew I wouldn't. I couldn't. I locked myself in my own apartment, turned off the lights, and sat in the dark until sunrise, staring at my own reflection in the blackened television screen, just to make sure it didn't move when I didn't. The next morning, her door was shut again, locked, no signs of anyone having entered or left. The hallway looked the same, smelled the same, felt the same. But I knew something had shifted. The air was heavier. The silence between footsteps longer. That's when I began noticing changes in my own space. Small at first, my books rearranged, not alphabetically, but thematically, like someone was trying to tell a story with the titles. My toothbrush moved half an inch to the left. My blinds tilted differently when I came home from work. I would have thought I was going mad if not for the Polaroid. It appeared on my kitchen table one evening. A picture I never took. A photo of Meek, sleeping, mouth slightly open, hand curled beneath my cheek. From the angle, it must have been taken from the end of the bed. I live alone. I have no tripod. I didn't call the police. What would I say? That my neighbor vanished and a faceless replacement haunted my apartment with photography and mirror rules. They'd laugh, or worse, come find nothing and leave me alone again with the feeling. Instead, I started digging. Into Lena, into the apartment. I pulled property records, rental histories, even old building blueprints. And that's when I found the first real fracture in reality. According to the city archive, there is no 8B. My floor only lists 6 units. 8A, C, D, F, G, no B. I went to the office in person, had them pull the file. The woman behind the counter squinted, then frowned. Sometimes they skip letters, she offered weakly, for superstition or layout reasons. But that made no sense. I lived next to it. I touched its walls. I walked through its door. I read her journal. I saw her walk out. I returned home shaking. The hallway that night felt longer, the lights dimmer. The numbers on the doors seemed to pulse faintly, as if aware I was finally asking the right questions. I stood in front of 80B for a long time, then I knocked. Once, twice, no answer. I pressed my ear to the wood. I expected silence. I hoped for it. Instead, I heard breathing. Shallow, just on the other side. I opened my mouth to speak but caught my reflection in the brass number plate. My mouth wasn't moving. I stepped back. Something inside me, instinct or fear or memory from a life I hadn't lived, told me to run. And I did. But the story doesn't end there. It never does it? Not with buildings like this. Not with neighbors like Lena. Because a few nights later, the dreams returned. Not like before. These were sharper, clearer. I was in her apartment again, but it was different. The furniture was gone. The walls covered in mirrors, each showing not me, but versions of me. One crying, one laughing, one staring blankly with blood under his nose. They didn't move in sync. They weren't reflections. They were records. And in the center of the room stood Lena, or what looked like her, except her eyes were mirrors too, and in them, I saw myself. Not as I am, but as something else. As if I'd already become what she feared. I woke up gasping, floorboards cold under my back, my bedsheets tossed across the room. That morning, I checked the hallway. 8B was gone. Not closed, gone. Where the door had been was now a seamless stretch of wall. Painted, smooth, no hinges, no frame, like it had never existed. I knocked anyway, just to be sure. The woman across from me. 8C opened her door slightly. She was pale, trembling. "You saw it too, didn't you?" she whispered. I stared at her. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. "What did you see?" I asked. Her lips quivered. "There's no one living in that unit. There hasn't been for years." But sometimes her eyes darted to the wall. Sometimes people walk out of it, and when they do, they take something with them. A piece of you. I wanted to leave, move out, burn the building if I could. But when I tried to pack, I couldn't. Not because I lacked boxes or time, but because every time I touched something, A photo frame, a drawer, a book. I remembered things that didn't happen. I saw memories that weren't mine. I felt grief for people I never met. My apartment wasn't mine anymore. It wasn't anyone's. It was recording me, every breath, every blink. My mirror wouldn't fog. My phone only showed static on the front camera. My name began to look wrong when I wrote it. Not misspelled, just not mine. And then the final letter came. Slipped under my door. Just 3 words, "You're next." B. I turned it over. The back was blank, but when I held it to the light, I saw faint imprints, like someone had written hard on the sheet above it. The letters read, "There was never a Lena. Only what she left behind." And suddenly, I understood. She didn't disappear. She became the apartment, and now it's waiting. From you. For whoever knocks next. I stopped knocking. I stopped speaking. I even stopped breathing normally, like the act of drawing in air might make me visible to whatever was watching from the other side. Days passed, or maybe it was weeks. Time no longer moved in straight lines. Some mornings I woke up in my clothes from the day before, lying sideways across the floor. Other times, I blinked and it was already night, and the sun had disappeared without asking my permission. The world outside my window still functioned. I could see buses running, people walking their dogs, neon signs blinking in tired rhythm. But my apartment had become a holding cell for something else entirely. I kept the lights on all the time, even when I slept. Especially when I slept, but the shadows still came. They no longer needed darkness. It started with the mirror in my bathroom. I caught it shifting, not my reflection, but the glass itself. Just a ripple, like water flexing under pressure, and then flat again. I told myself it was a trick of the light. Stress. Hallucination. But then the television screen turned on by itself and showed me footage I'd never seen. Me, standing still in my kitchen, staring into nothing, mouth moving like I was speaking to someone who wasn't there. The footage was time-stamped 3 hours into the future. I unplugged the TV. It turned on anyway. I don't know when the apartment began to respond to me, but I'm certain it wasn't always like this. Before Lena vanished, before the journals and photographs and doors that unhinged themselves from reality, it had been just a space. Now it was something else. A living thing. It pulsed, it breathed, it remembered. And it remembered everything. If I left a cup on the counter, it returned to the exact position I'd placed it the day before. If I threw away a note, it reappeared on my pillow. The apartment didn't want me to forget. It needed me to remember something I never knew. I tried to escape. That's not dramatic phrasing. I mean it literally. I packed a bag, left my keys on the table, walked out the front door with my coat and a plan to never come back. I reached the lobby. I even touched the handle on the front door, but when I pulled it open, there was nothing. Not a street, not a sidewalk, just another hallway, identical to the one outside my unit. 6 doors, same faded carpet, same hum of electricity just beneath hearing level. I closed the door, opened again, still hallway. I ran back up the stairs, 3 flights, 4, 5, and found myself back at my own door, my nameplate now bearing a single etched word, Lena. I hadn't carved it. I stayed inside after that. Not out of surrender, but out of survival. Whatever rules governed this place were slipping, bending, or rewriting themselves entirely. The apartment no longer followed the logic of floor plans or architecture. Some nights my bedroom door led to the hallway. Other nights it opened into the bathroom. Once I stepped into my closet and emerged in a room I'd never seen before. A copy of 8B, but distorted. The angles were wrong, the windows were painted on, and the furniture was bolted to the ceiling. I saw a version of myself sitting in the corner, reading the black journal aloud with eyes closed. I didn't stay to hear what I was saying. I ran, slammed the closet shut. When I opened it again, it was coats and shoes like normal. Nothing more. That was the night I started writing everything down. Every change, every sound, every flicker of light or displacement of time. I wrote not to remember, but to anchor myself. If I could hold the past in my own handwriting, maybe I could prove I still existed. That there was a version of me untouched by this place. But even the journal began betraying me. Pages I didn't write appeared in the margins. New entries time-stamped for dates that hadn't come yet. One entry simply read, "Don't trust the third knock." Another, "She's not gone. She's in the walls now." And a third, chillingly scrawled in a different ink, "Look behind you before reading further." I refused to turn around. But the moment I blinked, I felt it. A shift in pressure. The unmistakable sensation of being observed. Not by someone outside, but from within. Like the atoms in the air had conspired to watch. I stopped writing for 3 days. The entries continued anyway. One morning, the bathroom mirror was gone. Not cracked, not shattered, gone. replaced by a slab of wall smooth and painted over, as if the mirror had never existed. But when I stood in front of it, I could still see myself. Not directly, there was no reflection. But in my head, I saw it, my own face staring back with a look I didn't recognize. A look of understanding. Like that version of me had already accepted what I still refused to admit. I reached out to touch the wall, and it was cold. Not drywall, not plaster. Cold like metal left in snow, cold like a morgue. I pulled back. Behind me, the television clicked on again, footage. But not of me. This time it was Lena, sitting at her dining table, eyes wide open, not blinking. Her lips were moving. I couldn't hear the audio, but I read the subtitles the screen had started showing on its own. You can't escape the place you've named. You made it real by noticing. You made it permanent by remembering. Now you're part of it. You always were. Then the screen cut to static. That's when I heard the knock. 3 times. Soft, but deliberate. I didn't answer. I stood still, heart thrumming, blood loud in my ears. Another knock. This time only once. Then a voice. My voice. Let me in. It wasn't a mistake. It was me. Perfect mimicry. Down to the cadence, the pause between syllables, the breath I always take before speaking when I'm nervous. It's safe, my voice said. You have to see something? I pressed my hand over my mouth. The doorknob turned, rattled, then stopped, and from the other side, you already opened it, remember? I checked the lock. It was still bolted. I checked the chain, still attached. But when I turned back, the door was wide open, and there was no one there. The hallway was no longer a hallway. It stretched farther than it should, at an angle that felt like vertigo even to glance at. Doors lined the sides, infinite and unmarked. Every 10th one pulsed faintly with light. I didn't step out, but the smell drifted in. Old books, melted plastic, something sharp like ozone after a storm, and faint music. Jazz. The kind Lena used to play. The kind that warped if you listened too long. Then I saw it. At the very end of the endless hallway. A door. Not like the others. This one was made of mirrors. A single slab reflecting nothing. Just darkness. And carved across it, barely visible B. I slammed my door shut. I shoved furniture in front of it. Piled books. Anything with weight. The hallway remained still, but the jazz didn't stop. It played for hours. Until I finally fell asleep from sheer exhaustion, ears ringing with trumpet notes that sounded like weeping. When I woke up, there was something new on my table. A photo frame. Inside it, a picture of me and Lena, smiling side by side, arms around each other like old friends. I've never taken that photo. I've never stood that close to her. But there we were, grinning like we'd survived something together. Written on the back, in cursive I'd never seen before, "Welcome home, B." And now I understand. Lena didn't become the apartment. The apartment became Lena. Or maybe it always was. And she was just the last person it remembered well enough to wear. But now it's remembering me. It's learning my shape, my voice, my habits. It's copying my handwriting. It's dreaming my dreams. And one day soon it won't need me anymore, because it will be me and someone else, someone curious, will move into 8A, and they'll hear jazz through the walls, and they'll start writing things down, and they'll wonder who used to live next door. I began marking the days with scratches on the wall, small, vertical lines behind the dresser where no one else would see, not because I believed it would keep me sane, but because I needed proof that time still passed, that I hadn't become some fixed photograph in a room that didn't know how to let go. But the lines started moving. I'd wake up and find them longer, or slanted, or twisted into shapes that looked suspiciously like letters. Then they began appearing in other rooms. Above the kitchen sink, behind the bathroom mirror that no longer existed, even etched faintly into the cold window pane where my reflection now watched me with just a half-second delay. I stopped counting after the 47th mark. Either I'd been here too long, or the apartment had started counting for me. I still heard my voice some nights, from the other side of the door, from inside the air vent, once from underneath the bed, always saying the same thing: you've already said yes. But I hadn't. I never agreed to this, never gave permission. I never invited anything in, unless remembering Lena was the invitation, unless reading her journal, opening her door, thinking too long about the missing shadow. That was enough. The truth is, consent doesn't need to be spoken when the thing you're dealing with exists outside language. The apartment had moods now. I could feel them. It wasn't just cold or hot, bright or dark. It was grief, panic, hunger. I'd open the fridge and find it full of food I hadn't bought. Always expired, always familiar. Brands I hadn't eaten in years. Meals my mother made when I was a child, down to the brand of mustard and the specific cracked bowl she used to serve it in. I never touched them. I knew better. Whatever fed this place wanted more than appetite. Then came the neighbors. Not the real ones. Not the exhausted woman from 80C or the young man from the headphones and nervous smile. No, these were different. One night, I looked through the peephole and saw them. Figures walking up and down the hallway like clockwork toys. No faces, just featureless smoothness where eyes and mouths should have been. Each wearing a key around their neck, each stopping briefly at every door, placing their ear against it, then moving on. When they reached mine, they paused longer. 30 seconds, a full minute. Then, without knocking, they turned and disappeared around a corner that shouldn't exist. I never heard footsteps, only the shifting of weight on wooden floorboards that weren't really there. I stopped using my own name, not even in my thoughts. I felt it slipping, syllable by syllable, like it belonged to someone else now. A borrowed identity that no longer matched the shape of my spine. Every time I tried to say it out loud, my mouth wouldn't form the last letter. I'd catch glimpses of old mail in the hallway with my name scratched out, replaced by variations L, Bennett, B. Lennox. Even just a single letter B. I began to think maybe I'd never lived here under my own name. Maybe Lena was just another version of the same thing, the previous B before me. Then, on a night where the wind outside howled like it was being torn apart, I found a door where my closet used to be. Not inside it. Instead of it, plain wood, antique brass knob, no markings. It hadn't been there that morning. I stood in front of it for what felt like hours. My breath fogged slightly even though the room was warm. And for the first time since this started, I felt it again. That pull, the one I'd felt when I stepped into Lena's apartment the first time. Not fear, not even curiosity. Permission opened the door. Beyond it was a stairwell, narrow, descending, lit by naked bulbs that flickered but never failed. The walls were covered in writing. Thousands of sentences overlapping, some etched deep, some barely visible, like whispers turned into scratches. As I walked down, I read what I could. Don't look back. She's not gone. She's under the floor. Every version of you is waiting below. They remember the ones who tried to forget. This isn't a staircase, it's a spine. And at the very bottom, carved larger than the rest, IFO Yuki IKTBK Yo E no TATECAME. The door at the bottom was already open. I stepped through and found myself in a room that looked exactly like mine. But the air was wrong. It smelled like burnt photographs and wilted flowers. The lights flickered and never quite reached the corners. And sitting on the couch was me, or something close, same face, same eyes. But his movements were off, deliberate, programmed, like he was remembering how to be me in real time. He looked up and smiled, a slow, mechanical curling of the lips. "You shouldn't have come," he said. His voice was my voice. I turned to leave. The door was gone. Only smooth wall behind me. I heard him stand. His footsteps weren't right. They didn't sound like rubber on hardwood. They sounded like skin dragging across glass. I didn't look back. I ran through the apartment, through the copy of my life, until I found another door. Opened it, entered a hallway. Not the one from my building. This one was wet, the floor slick with something dark, the walls pulsing gently like lungs. I didn't stop running. Eventually I woke up, in my lights on, room still. Closet back to normal. But my feet were covered in soot. And one of my fingernails was missing. The mirror in the bathroom was back. But now it showed a delay of 5 seconds. I'd smile and it would take 5 seconds to return the expression. I didn't test it again after that. My neighbor in 80C disappeared 2 days later. The door remained closed, mail piled up, and when I finally knocked, the smell that came through the crack was exactly the same as the one in that hallway: wilted flowers, burnt photographs, something beneath that I couldn't name. I think the apartment chose her next. Or maybe she was never there to begin with. Maybe she was just an echo, a test. I haven't slept properly in days. I leave the TV on, but now it shows channels that don't exist. All static, except for one that occasionally flashes frames of people I know. Friends, old teachers, family. All standing still, eyes blacked out. The subtitles always read the same: "We told you not to look." Now we're watching. I don't think I'm alive in the normal sense anymore. My body functions. My mind remembers things. But the timelines have diverged. I get mail from places I've never lived. My phone shows voicemails from people who call me by different names. I found a photograph in my kitchen drawer. Me sitting at the dining table, smiling with 2 children I've never met. On the back, "Happy Father's Day, B, love Eva and Micah." I don't have children. At least I didn't. But I know their names now. That's how it spreads, I think. Not by force, but through memory, through suggestion, through curiosity. The moment you think about it, it owns a piece of you. And the more you remember, the more real it becomes. The apartment doesn't trap you with walls. It traps you with thoughts. Lena knew this. That's why she left those warnings. That's why her name was never real. She wasn't running from it. She was trying not to become it. And she failed, just like I'm failing now. Because last night I found a note on my pillow. In my handwriting, I didn't write it. You're almost ready. The mirrors are aligned. One more version left to become. It was signed B. And this morning, the scar on my left shoulder, the one I got when I fell off my bike at 9 years old, was gone. In its place at a small etched letter. Just like before, just like hers, I tried to erase the letter. I used soap, hot water, even the edge of a razor blade. But it wasn't ink and it wasn't carved. It was beneath the skin, like the body had grown it organically, a mark formed not by choice but by progression. Like a tree ring. A stage. A sign that something irreversible had already taken root. I wrapped it in gauze, not to heal it, but to hide it. From the mirrors, from myself, from whatever was watching. But deep down I knew the apartment wasn't marking me. It was identifying me, like a suitcase tag. A return label. I hadn't been outside in days. Or had I? The windows no longer revealed the street. Sometimes I'd look out and see rows of doors suspended in blackness, like my building had been lifted and transplanted into space, with nothing beyond but infinite thresholds. Other times I'd see people, hundreds of them, all staring straight up at my window unmoving. Each wore my face, not a resemblance. My actual face. And when I blinked, so did they. The air was changing, not the temperature. The weight, everything felt heavier. Every breath required effort, every movement triggered a delay, like walking through syrup. The clock slowed down too. I watched my kitchen wall clock take 89 seconds between ticks, but my watch kept ticking normally, until it started counting backwards. That's when I stopped wearing it. I opened the fridge one morning and found it full again. This time, not food, but paper. Pages torn from notebooks I'd never written in, each covered in the same script I saw in Lena's journal. Only now it matched my handwriting. Each note began with the same phrase, "It's already happened," and ended with variations off, "You were the last one who didn't forget." Some were addressed to B. Others just said, "To whoever I become." One read, "If you're reading this, it means I've failed again." I didn't throw them away. I couldn't. Every attempt was reversed. I'd blink and the papers would be neatly stacked on the counter, or tucked under my pillow, or folded in my pockets. Once I burned them in the sink, watched them crumple and blacken. And the next day they were back, untouched, even the ash gone. The apartment didn't want to let them go, because the apartment remembered. I stopped answering the phone. It rang at odd hours, never the same tone twice. Sometimes a classic ring, other times the sound of dripping water, or distant screaming, or the exact voice of someone I loved. My mother, a childhood friend, a teacher long dead. I'd pick up once in a moment of weakness and hear only silence. Then my own voice, whispering, "Stop resisting. You're only making the transition slower." That was the first time I screamed. Not out of fear, but out of grief. Because some part of me already agreed. I began to understand the rules, if you could call them that. The apartment responded to memory. It was made of it, fed by it. Whenever I tried to forget something, an old address, a favorite song, the way my father laughed when he was tired, those things would manifest in the space. I'd hear the song playing from a radio with no station, smell my father's cologne in the closet, find my childhood address written in condensation on the bathroom mirror. I tried forcing amnesia, reciting gibberish, overriding old facts with nonsense. But the apartment always knew the difference. It never let go of what I tried to erase. And then came the door again. Not the one to the hallway. The other one. It appeared behind the bookshelf this time, embedded in a wall that hadn't existed yesterday. I hadn't moved the shelf, but it had moved itself, tilted away to reveal the outline of that same wooden frame with the antique knob, no markings except a single carved letter, B. This time, it was unlocked. I told myself I wouldn't go in, that I'd finally reached the end of my willingness. But I didn't have a choice. That night, the apartment shifted. I woke up in a different room. Not just furniture moved, architecture. The walls had changed angles, my bed was facing the wrong direction, and the ceiling light was now a ceiling mirror, reflecting a version of me that didn't blink when I did. There was no door to the hallway anymore, only the one behind the bookshelf. So I opened it. The stairwell was steeper now, wet, like descending through the inside of a throat. The walls pulsed faintly warm to the touch, and this time the writing was deeper, gouged rather than scratched. Some in blood, some in teeth marks. I didn't stop to read them. I knew what they said. They were always the same warnings I didn't understand until I had already broken them. A door at the bottom, waiting ajar. Beyond it, a room I hadn't seen before. It looked like a theater, rows of empty chairs, all facing a screen that was blank except for a single word in red, observe. And sitting in every chair was me. Hundreds of me, each slightly different, one older, one thinner, one with a broken nose, one with no eyes, all staring forward in silence. I walked between the aisles, trembling, passing versions of myself that did not move, did not blink. But one, only one, turned its head slowly as I passed. It had no mouth, but I still heard it speak, "You're late." Then the screen changed. Images flickered in rapid sequence. Lena at her table, me discovering the note. The door opening, the first knock, the hallway stretching, the mirrors blinking back, and then faster. The woman in 8C weeping, the man from AF disappearing into static, a baby crying in a room with no crib, a version of me stepping backward into a wall and vanishing, until it all slowed and held on one final image, a door. Not marked B, this time, marked U. And I understood. The apartment wasn't just remembering, it was recording. Not events, versions. Every tenant, every failed escape, each folded into its walls like pages in an infinite book. Lena hadn't vanished. She had been overwritten. So had the others, not destroyed, absorbed, remixed, played back in new patterns. I turned back to the silent audience. They were all me, all past attempts, all failures. And this was the final act. One of them stood. It was the original, or maybe the most complete. He looked at me and nodded, then walked straight through the screen and disappeared. And I was alone. Except I wasn't. The door behind me closed with a snap. The word on the screen changed. Become, I screamed, fought. But there was no escape. The seats were gone. The walls melted. And the apartment folded itself inside out, wrapping me in memories I didn't own, voices I'd never heard, lives I had never lived. My skin burned with names I didn't recognize. My mind fractured into past tense and possibility. I couldn't remember my own birthday, my own face. But I remembered Lena, and I remembered why. Because she left a trail. And now, so had I. That's what this was always about. Not containment. Continuation. And the apartment doesn't need to chase you. It only needs you to wonder, to open the door, to ask what happened in 8B. That's enough. It always starts with curiosity and ends with silence. I tried to erase the letter. I scrubbed at it until my skin went raw, soaked my shoulder in boiling water, even held a lighter near it to see if pain would undo permanence. But it didn't burn. It didn't fade. It pulsed beneath the skin like a vein that had twisted into language. The letter wasn't an addition. It was a revelation, as if I'd been marked long ago, and only now was the truth surfacing. I started to wonder if this had always been coming, if Lena's story was never hers, if I had been circling this inevitability for years, and the scariest part wasn't that I might be right. It was how calm I felt once I accepted it. The apartment had stopped pretending it was mine. Familiar details began to dissolve. Family photos on the wall turned to blurry smears, smiling faces melting into faceless silhouettes. My books changed titles. My clothes no longer fit, not because they shrank, but because my body was subtly shifting, my limbs longer in the mirror than they felt in the dark. The smell in the apartment changed too. Not rotting or mold. Something stranger, like burnt sugar and metal and old perfume, like memories trying to take physical form. I stopped opening the fridge. I stopped sleeping in the bed. I slept on the floor now, pressed flat against the hardwood, listening to the house breathe. Sometimes it whispered, not in words, in patterns. Groans in the pipes it resembled sighs, knocks in 3s and 7s, static that hummed the melody of lullabies I couldn't quite place. I began to write them down, not because I thought it would help, but because the act of writing kept me anchored. But the words started shifting on the page, rearranging when I looked away. One entry I reread contained nothing I'd written. Just a sentence over and over, "You're almost complete. Beneath it, your voice is nearly perfect." I stopped journaling. Then came the second mirror. It appeared in the hallway overnight. Full-length freestanding brass frame. I never bought it. But there it stood, right outside the bedroom, angled to face the front door. When I walked past, it reflected everything normally. Until I moved. Then it hesitated, lagged. A beat too slow. Sometimes the reflection blinked when I didn't. Sometimes it smiled. Once I woke in the night to find the mirror had turned on its own, facing my bed. The reflection was still me, sleeping, but my reflection's eyes were open. The apartment pulsed more heavily now. I could feel it in the walls, like it had a heartbeat. A slow, thunderous rhythm that matched mine at first. But then it began to lead, and I followed. My routine blurred. Days bled into each other. I'd wake up on the floor with dried blood under my nose and no memory of what I'd done. I found bruises in places I couldn't reach, scratches shaped like symbols on my calves. I stopped counting the hours. The clocks had already stopped ticking. One day, I looked outside and there was nothing. Just fog. White, depthless, infinite. Like the world had been erased. That was when the TV came back. I hadn't plugged it in. The cable had been cut weeks ago. But one night, it turned on. A soft click and a glow in the corner of the room. The screen showed static at first, then color, then not a video. A live feed. I watched myself from behind, sitting on the floor. Watching the television, I turned quickly. Nothing there. I looked back at the screen. Now I was facing it. My eyes locked with my own. I mouthed something on the screen. I couldn't hear it. So I read my own lips let me out. I unplugged the TV, smashed it with a chair, threw the pieces into the bathtub. The next morning, it was back. Whole and on. This time, the screen showed Lena, sitting in the apartment, older than I remembered her. Her hair longer, her skin paler. She wasn't speaking, just staring into the camera, lips slightly parted. After a minute, she raised a hand, pressed her palm to the screen. Behind her, the door to 80B opened on its own. The static resumed. I knew what it wanted. The apartment didn't feed on flesh. It fed on identity, on memory, on the erosion of self through observation. Mirrors, screens, echoes. It watched until you began to question which version of you it was reflecting. And then it took the one that broke first. I began to lose time. Sometimes I'd find food half eaten on the table, but I hadn't cooked in weeks. My fingernails were clipped, but I hadn't touched scissors. I'd hear my voice talking in another room. Laughing, whispering, reciting things I'd never said. And each time, I'd feel a little less certain that I was still the original. Then the door reappeared, the one from the bookshelf. Except now it was in the ceiling. A square outline above the hallway, with a rope ladder dangling down, inviting. The air beneath it was colder, cleaner. A smell like snow and antiseptic. I should have ignored it, but the apartment hadn't given me a choice in weeks. When I tried to walk away, the floor beneath me moved. Subtle, enough to redirect. I climbed. The room above was blinding white, like a soundproof lab. Sterile walls, a single table in the center with a tape recorder and a sheet of paper. I pressed play. My voice began to speak. This is the 38th iteration. The subject still resists final integration. Memory retention is high, but emotional compliance remains unstable. Attempting full echo sync in the next cycle. I dropped the recorder, stumbled back. Read the paper. It was a list of every moment I thought I'd survived. The knock, the journal, the mirror, the dream, the other versions. Beside each, a check mark, except the last. Subject accepts transformation. That box was still blank. Until I blinked and saw it fill itself in. I tried to scream. Couldn't. My throat didn't move. My tongue felt wrong in my mouth. My hands were no longer shaking. They were still. Too still. I looked down at my arms. Smooth. Pale. No veins. Just surface. I ran back to the ladder, but it was gone. The ceiling was whole. The hallway below had vanished. The white room stretched endlessly now, walls falling away, replaced with mirrors, thousands of them, each showing a different me. Smiling. Crying. Screaming. Sleeping. Rotting. One reflection stepped forward. I didn't. It pressed its palm to the glass. My palm raised to meet it without permission. I could feel the cold, the pulse on the other side. I wasn't the one moving anymore. I was being moved. My body, just a suit. I was no longer in control. I'd become a memory. The apartments. And then everything snapped back. I was in my bed. Door closed, lights off. No ceiling trap. No mirror room. The TV was blank. My hands were normal. My breathing fast and loud and mine. It had been a dream, or so I tried to believe, until I saw the final change. My calendar. The one I hadn't touched since all of this began. Every page torn away. Every date gone. Except one, circled in red. Tomorrow. And next to it, in handwriting I didn't recognize, a full integration scheduled. No explanation. No signature. Just 3 small letters beneath the circle. Verb B, and now I know. B isn't a person. It's a version. A cycle. A label for whatever the apartment finishes rewriting. Lena wasn't the first. I'm not the last. There is no escape. Only delay. You hold out long enough to think you're still yourself, but one day you wake up and the mirror doesn't blink back, and you realize the thing in the reflection isn't waiting for you anymore. It already moved in, and it brought friends. I thought there'd be a moment, a threshold, some final gasp or twist when the apartment truly claimed me, but it didn't happen that way. There was no scream, no flashing lights or spiraling black hole. I simply woke up one morning and noticed the absence, not of sound or sight, but of weight. The weight of resistance, the internal friction I'd fought against since this all began. Gone. like an argument had been settled in my sleep and I'd been left out of the negotiation. I stood up from the bed, not the floor anymore. The bed, neatly made, sheets crisp, corners tucked. I didn't remember doing that, but I didn't feel alarmed. I walked to the kitchen. The kettle turned on by itself as I approached. It knew. Everything did. The walls no longer watched. They anticipated. There was no longer a separation between me and the apartment. It moved when I did. It thought before I did. Or maybe I had simply fallen in sync. Maybe it had stopped recording me and started being me. Outside the window was a normal street. Cars, trees, a delivery truck. But there was no sound. The world played out like a looped video behind glass. Perfectly realistic, completely untouchable. A man walked by with a dog. I waved. He didn't see me. He wasn't real. I think he never was. Or maybe I wasn't anymore. The mail slot clicked. A single envelope dropped in. No name, no address, just a symbol, a circle with a vertical line through it. I opened it without hesitation. Inside was a single piece of paper. B complete. Transfer authorized. Beneath it, proceed with placement. No instructions. None were needed. That's when I heard the knock. Not on my door. On the one beside it. Apartment 8A. It sounded soft. Polite. Polite. Hopeful. The way I once knocked. What feels like a lifetime ago. My heart, or whatever was left of it, tightened. I stepped closer, pressed my ear to the wall, and I heard in. The new tenant. Unpacking boxes. Setting up shelves. Humming. A young voice. Male. Maybe 20s. New to the city, judging by the way he moved furniture loudly, without fear of disturbing anyone. I could practically smell his optimism. I didn't knock. Not yet. I returned to my mirror. It reflected me perfectly. No delays. No distortions. But I didn't recognize the expression. It was calm. Patient. The expression of someone with purpose. That was the moment I understood the apartment had no true form. It wasn't the walls, the air, or the rooms. It was the process. A loop. A refining mechanism. It took people and stripped away the irrelevant ego, memory, individuality. Until only utility remained. I wasn't a person anymore. I was a function. The kettle clicked off. Tea was ready. I sat at the table and opened the journal. The one I thought I'd thrown away months ago. It was blank again. Not because nothing had happened, but because now it was my job to fill it. For him. The boy next door. I began to write. Not a warning, not a cry for help. That would have been pointless. The apartment didn't listen to pleas. It listened to attention. The more you noticed it, the more you gave. So I didn't warn him. I planted questions. I wrote just enough to create curiosity. Just enough to bring him to the threshold. Have you noticed the mirror doesn't blink with you? Have you heard the footsteps in the wall when you're not moving? Do you ever feel like your thoughts have an echo? I would leave these notes where he could find them. One under the rug. One taped behind a cabinet. One slipped into the air vent. All handwritten. All subtly matching his own style, shaped by the apartment's influence. I would never speak to him directly. That would spoil the pattern. I had to become part of the background. A neighbor he rarely sees. A voice he thinks he imagined. An old rumor passed along by silence. He would come to me eventually. With questions. With fear. With the eyes of someone who had just noticed the first crack in the world. And when he knocked on my door, I would wait. Then I would answer. Not as myself. Not as B. But as the role. The one who passes the match into dry grass. The one who steps aside as the cycle begins anew. But the twist. I'm not stuck here. I can leave. I discovered that last night. Not by accident. Not by defiance. But by completion. Once the apartment finishes building you into what it needs, it no longer holds you. It sends you. I walked out the front door at midnight. Down the hallway, past the doors that had once looped and tricked me. Past the mirror that used to lag. Past the place where 8B once was. But now looked like a blank wall. I walked out into the street. The real street. I could smell garbage and wet asphalt. I could hear the wind. I walked for hours. No one looked at me twice. I was ordinary, a clean. Empty. And I understood. I was the delivery now. The seed. The apartment doesn't live in one place. It spreads. Through memory. Through interaction. Through questions. It creates new rooms in buildings that were whole. It rewrites addresses. It waits for someone to wonder about a flickering light or a door that creaks too often. It waits for someone to become curious. That's the inflection point. I passed an apartment complex across town. Old, worn. One window had the curtains pulled wrong. Half open, tied strangely. I paused, looked up. There was a mirror in the window, facing outward. Not normal. A subtle invitation. I felt the pulse through the ground. The air hummed, just slightly. I walked on. I'm no longer afraid. I don't feel grief. Or nostalgia. Those emotions were shed long ago. I'm made of echoes now. Of borrowed thoughts. Of pages half written. But I remember enough of who I was to smile sadly when I think of that first knock. How small it was, how harmless it seemed. A simple neighborly curiosity. The first step in. Now I wait. In a new building. A new address. I don't know the number. It will choose one soon. Maybe 4C. Maybe 11D. But someone will move in next door, and they'll hear something. A knock. A whisper. Maybe just a soft jazz song playing when it shouldn't. They'll pause. They'll look around. They'll notice something they weren't supposed to. And that will be enough. It always is, because the story never ends. It just changes masks. The apartment isn't real estate. It's recursion, an infection of awareness. A structure made of broken identities, bound together by the act of remembering. You can't destroy it. You can only delay it. And if you've listened this far, if you've read all of this, then you've already opened the door. It doesn't need to be physical. It's a knock in your mind. You're thinking about it now. You're wondering. Just a little. If the mirror in your room always matched your movement. If your hallway ever looked longer at night. If that voice you once heard while falling asleep was just a dream. And now you'll listen harder. You'll test it. You'll try to forget. But forgetting is just remembering in disguise. You've noticed the door. You've begun the story. Welcome home. Enjoyed the video? Give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and tap the bell so you never miss an update.